Captain Laserhawk, a Blood Dragon remix definitely feels like the TV show of all time. Because when I initially found out about it, I was pretty interested to see about how it would turn out. A collaborative project between Ubisoft's current and old IPs certainly seems like an interesting premise, especially with the way about how it was presented when we didn't really know much about it at the time. But then fast forward to a few months later to where I eventually ended up checking out, and while I could say that I did somewhat enjoy it at the same time, a part of me just wished I was rewatching Cyberpunk Edgerunners, and let me explain. Now, just for the sake of clarity, I'm not trying to say that Laserhawk is a bad show within its entirety. Yes, there were moments and certain characters that I did enjoy seeing on screen. But then at the same time, there were some parts which I did feel like were weak, so how about I focus on the positives for now before I get into the negatives, starting off with simple things like the animation and art style. In which I just gotta say, yeah, it's pretty damn good for the most part. Both the animation and art style is pretty consistent, and I have to say, I really like half the character designs in the show. And also on top of that, if there was one thing which I kind of really liked upon the show, it had to be the way how it literally took the term remix and kind of took that to the extreme. Because while it's pretty consistent for the most part, there are times where the characters will just suddenly swap on a dime when it comes to the way about how they look, depending on their expression. And not only that, but there will be certain segments within its entirety to where it just feels like it's trying to pay tribute to a video game, which is honestly kind of impressive for the most part. And while I didn't like all of the characters in this show, I'm going to say that the voice acting was pretty solid for the most part. And on the subject of characters, man, I have to say, even though I did not really like the main character at all, or hell, most of the characters on the cast, I have to say, if there were two characters which I just loved the most, it had to be Bullfrog and Rayman, in which, yeah, it's kind of crazy, because Bullfrog is like the most ironic assassin ever with how, yeah, he's an assassin, he kills people because that's like the whole thing about McCreed, yet despite that, he's like the most humble person in the cast by trying to convince Laserhawk that, yeah, revenge isn't the way to get back at life and that it just makes you feel more empty than anything. And there's this whole moral dilemma going on with him as the show progresses. Not only that, but when it comes to Rayman, yeah, out of context and no one that's been playing the games, yeah, it definitely feels like a big slap to the face. But then at the same time, regarding one of the most ironic subplots throughout the show, which is shared among like what, 3 to 4 characters, Rayman feels like the one character that actually takes the idea of we must fight back against the corporations and actually does something about it, which is certainly something. But now that I'm done talking about the positives, how about I get into the negatives? Now, when it comes to some of my issues surrounding this show, I'm going to separate it into 3 parts. For one thing, it's going to be regarding the characters once again. For another thing, the pacing and the jokes, and well, yeah, pretty much that's it. So, to start off with the characters, notice how I only brought up 2 characters that don't really get enough screen time as it is, as the only ones that felt like they were interesting because of their individual character arcs and the moral dilemmas that they had to face, being both Bullfrog and Rayman. Well, I honestly feel like these are the characters that honestly stood out the most, because if you were going to ask me about anyone else in the show like Dolph Laserhawk, Paige, and Jade, or even Kate Fisher, I honestly couldn't really tell you much about them, mainly due to the fact that it feels like their characters don't really have enough time to shine as it is, or the fact that they just feel pretty damn static throughout the show. So when it finally comes to certain moments like Dolph having a sudden change of heart and realizing that, yeah, him killing the person that betrayed him doesn't necessarily fix the problem, honestly just kind of felt a bit random from out of nowhere, especially considering the fact that by the end he still, you know, technically offs himself by self-detonating, but at the same time not really dying. And then there's some other things which honestly just felt a bit weird in this show, like the pacing, for example, and the way about how certain jokes were, because like in the very beginning the show just keeps going and going and going, and certain jokes just kind of feel all up in your face with how it just keeps using profanity, but not even in the funny type of way, but just in the try hard has-been hotel slash hell of a boss type way, to where they just can't stop saying fuck every 3 minutes or so. And not only that, but I also feel like it's kind of strange how the show spends like a good majority of the first portion of the show being all all fast paced while also spending the last episodes trying to be all about exposition. Which sure, I guess would be fine, but I'm just like, if you're gonna have a slow burning show, at least be consistent with it to the very minimum. But in the end, I do feel like Captain Laserhawk: A Blood Dragon Remix is a pretty decent show. Does it have some room for improvement in the possible season 2 that might come? Yeah, maybe. But in my personal opinion, I just kind of recommend Edge Runners if you want a more consistent story, better characters, and also have something that has some pretty damn good animation for the most part. But that's all I have to say, folks. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I'll catch y'all at another upload coming eventually, and yeah, see y'all next time. Later, folks.